Okay. So here we have a very simple table that compares the two models of revelation. So the Quran is essentially one book, right? All of the material is collected in one book that has many chapters that are called surahs. Surah means chapter, and each chapter has different verses, which is called ayahs, right? And these chapters were not necessarily revealed in the same order that you find them in the book. They are revealed in different times, different places, and then later they were collated together in the current form that you see. And there are different theories as to are these the arrangement of the Quran in its current shape, is that also divine revelation, or has it been done later? I'm just trying to move this panel from the top so I can see my presentation, but it's okay. So vis-a-vis this model, we have the Bible, which consists of many books, and Muslims amongst us may be quite surprised when they first learn about this, because in our own traditional Islamic education, we are told that each religion has its own book that has come to the prophet of that religion. So for example, the common idea amongst young Muslims who go to school is that, well, Judaism is the religion of the religion that has Moses as his prophet, and they have a book which is Torah, right? The same style that is referred to in the Quran. Or Christianity has a prophet, which is Jesus Christ, and they have a book which is called Injil, or the Gospel, right? But when we approach the scripture of Judaism and Christianity, we realize that actually it's many books. And Torah in particular that we are studying consists of 5 books. In the Quran, you have a divine narrative perspective. What does it mean? It means that who's the storyteller? The storyteller is almost exclusively God, and the voice is the voice of God. And everybody else who speaks in the Quran appears in quotation marks. So next time you read the Quran, try to pay attention to this. See who's speaking, as Ida was mentioning last time as well. So in that sense, God is the sole author of the Quran. So the authorship of the Quran falls within divine source exclusively. But for the Bible, we have a very different idea of authorship. There is an idea of divine human collaboration, idea of inspiration. There is still an exclusive divine source, but the ideas and scripture have been inspired to human beings, and you have multiple human authors and even editors. This is a very unusual and strange idea for Muslim readers, to have various editors of the scripture. But that is the way in which model of revelation works from a biblical perspective. And then you have sometimes, especially in the Torah, you have this invisible narrative voice. Somebody's telling the story. There's a storyteller, which is, we don't know who that is. So it's not God necessarily, because God in many of the stories appear as a character along with other characters. Like fairy tales that start by saying, once upon a time there was so and so, so there's a storyteller that we don't see, but we hear, and it's telling the story. And there are many theories as to who these storytellers are, who has written it down, but we're not going to get into that, just so far as we know the difference between the Quran and the Bible in this sense. Again, the Quran is direct verbatim revelation, or at least considered by Muslims to be so. Whatever God has revealed has been transcribed verbatim in the book that we have today, whereas the Bible is inspired revelation. So you have, again, almost like a human hand here as well. So the words, even though they're inspired by a divine source, but they're still written down by humans, right? So you get that human perspective too, and it's fascinating. If you really give it space to speak in its own terms, and then you read the shared stories, like for example the way in which I read the Joseph stories, then you see some aspects of humanity being revealed in these stories that may not necessarily exist or be so explicit in the Quranic stories, because the Quran is from the perspective of divine and God. So you may not get as much human details of human emotions or human challenges in the stories. Again, the Quran has been revealed over only 23 years, whereas the Bible has been revealed over many, many years and centuries. The Quran has been revealed to Prophet Muhammad, so the idea that I mentioned earlier as well of one prophet, one book. But in the biblical model, you have the scripture inspired to a variety of people during a very long period of time. In Islam, many Muslims, most Muslims, if not all Muslims, consider the text itself to be holy. So if you go, for example, to a mosque or you go to your friend's house, you see that they handle the text of the Quran with such care, and it's holy in itself. If you go to Muslim country, when the word, a verse of the Quran is written somewhere, you are not even allowed to, if you're throwing away some papers and you printed some Quranic verses, it's really a bad thing to put that in the bin as well. So you have to treat even the physical manifestation of scripture as a holy thing in itself. There are different opinions about this subject in Christianity and Judaism, but on the whole, the treatment of the physical manifestation of scripture is very different between the two traditions. The Quran is considered as a miracle in itself. Also because Prophet Muhammad was known to be an illiterate person. He didn't know how to read and write. So it was such a big miracle for an illiterate person to recite such advanced and beautiful verses in Arabic, whereas he himself did not any education in reading and writing. The Bible contains stories about miracles, but in itself is not considered in the same way as a miracle. Again, the Quran has a non-chronological order. Sorry, I'm just trying to get rid of these panels so I can read the bottom of my slide. Okay. The Quran doesn't tell the stories in chronological order. There's very little emphasis on names or historical details about places and things like that, whereas the Torah, at least, is told from a chronological order. There's a huge emphasis of genealogies and other details about the names of places and people. And these are important. Theologically, these differences actually matter. And we can discuss this later when we talk about the Joseph stories, but just main idea for now. So basically, all of these things, I want to conclude by saying that in the Quran, the stories are really there to point at a very explicit moral message. So often the message is communicated explicitly. It says, this is what you should be thinking after reading this story, or this is the message of the story. And they even come at the beginning or everywhere in different chapters. Whereas the moral message or the ethical, theological message is often hidden within the narrative in the Bible. So you're supposed to get a sense of that message by reading all of the story and reflecting on it. So there's a lot more left for interpretation. Okay. So now what I'd like you to do is to go into breakout rooms and together try to think of some of the presumptions that you had about the nature of the other scripture and faith. For example, I mentioned to you that I myself, when I was growing up, I was going to school, I had this idea that, you know, Judaism is the religion of Jews, and they have a prophet who's Moses, and they have a book which is the Torah. And then Christianity, Jesus, and gospel, and then Muslims have a book which is the Quran, and we have a prophet who's Prophet Muhammad. What assumptions, presumptions did you have about the other faith and scripture before you ever read it, if anything? You know, maybe you will say, like, I didn't know anything, I'd never heard of the other religion or the other scripture. That's also fine. So just discuss with each other. For example, did your assumptions come from school? Was it something you heard from your grandparents, you know, your family? Was it something in society or tradition or anything else? And in your groups, make sure that somebody takes note of these different things, and then tell us when you come back about some of these presumptions that you had. Okay? Great. See you after. About everybody, if the person nominated from your group could put some ideas in the chat box. So just very simple words. What were some of the misconceptions? Or not necessarily misconceptions, but just assumptions. You know, what did you think, and where did they come from? So who told you about that before you had a chance to find out for yourself? If you can just put them in the chat, it would be interesting to see, and also specify if this assumption was by a Christian or by a Muslim, about which text. So as you're doing that, maybe I give you a couple of minutes to put ideas